My name is Ariana, and I'm the health coach for Integrative Family Medicine of Asheville. And today is the second of our interview series, How to Keep Exercising Right Now, during a pandemic and during the wintertime. And today we have Iyengar Yoga Asheville owners, Randy Loftis and Greta-Kent Stoll. And I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation. And I'm kind of curious if you want to kind of talk a little bit about Iyengar Yoga Asheville for folks who aren't familiar with what you are and what you offer, just before we dive into questions.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having us. And just location-wise, we are located in the Grovewood Village, which is sort of adjacent to the Grove Park Inn. It's a really neat area. There's the Antique Car Museum and another museum and some art studios. So we're within that space, and we opened in the early summer of 2018.
Mm-hmm. And we're very much dedicated to the practice and the teaching of Iyengar Yoga. Both of us have, decades of experience studying, and both of us have made several trips to India to study directly with the Iyengar family. And we have brought that back and have intended to share that with the Asheville community.
Yeah. You both met, actually, I was reading through the website, and you met in San Francisco at the Iyengar Institute. And then again, you've both traveled back to India. And so it seems like you both have a wealth of knowledge and experience around yoga, and specifically Iyengar yoga, that is unique for our area.
Drop in the ocean, but
not that there aren't masters out there that are also, well, have a lot of wisdom as well. But you definitely offer a resource to our community. And so, we kind of were interested in the gamut in terms of what our community is going through right now. For folks who have never done yoga, how can you get started right now in a pandemic during social distancing? Have you had any kind of thoughts or experience around supporting people and getting started?
We would be so excited to see new faces.
We've had a few. We have had a few, and even local new faces, which is always really exciting.
Yeah. So, if somebody wants to get started, we're eager to help them along the way. We have several classes on our schedule that would be really welcoming to brand new beginners. Not only that, we have open practice sessions in the morning. And if really somebody had cold feet, we would even invite them, for example, to an open practice session, and they could just come watch and see what we're doing.
Just to kind of dip their toes in the waters, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And we offer, we have beginning level through intermediate level classes. We have workshops, we have open practice, and then we also do something on Wednesday nights. I do something called lead practice, which is basically, and that's typically, I suggest that more for people who do have a little bit of experience, because I'm not so much teaching as much as it is, I say the pose, we do the pose, and we do practice together. Yeah, but there's some but really, I would say just jump in, whatever felt most comfortable to you, and we really welcome people with all levels of experience. With Zoom, you can even turn your camera off if you're really bad.
It's true. You have kind of artificial privacy in that sense, in a way that you don't get when you are actually in the yoga studio.
Yeah.
I'm curious, for somebody who's never done yoga but has always wanted to, how do you have any advice for how they can set up a space for doing yoga from home right now?
Yeah. Well, I think that, for instance, Randy and I, we've been obviously practicing yoga for quite a while. This is an essential part of our lives. So we have a whole kind of practice space set up at home. But one of the great things about yoga is you really don't need much. You really don't need much more than your body. So it's not that you really need some kind of, special designated space. What you could do is just, if you're wanting to take a class, for instance, online, you could just clear out a little corner of your bedroom, of your living room. It could be a hallway. Really all you need is a flat level surface, enough space to perhaps put down a sticky mat, And then, if you have an empty wall space, that helps. But I think that's really one of the appealing parts of yoga. Well, there are many things, but that's one piece, is that in some ways it's very minimalist, that you don't need much, just a little bit of a cleared out space, and that's all you really need to begin.
Yeah, and pretty soon it's like the yoga's happening everywhere. It's like you're in the kitchen and you're in between stirring the food for dinner, and you're doing a pose against the kitchen counter, or, it's kind of happening wherever you go. It's kind of practice that way.
Yeah.
And maybe that's actually a good place to just back up for a second and say, how would you describe yoga? Like, what is yoga and what benefits can it offer right now when we are living differently than normal?
Yeah. I mean, to take a stab at the bigger picture, I mean, it's interesting because I know that the title of this talk here mentions the word exercise. For a lot of people, they see, looking in from the outside, they see this practice as some form of exercise. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But then the more you get involved with this, the more you see that there's something much more there to it. Oftentimes I'll have students leave class, and yeah, they may say, oh, I feel great, I feel this, I feel that. But what they more often comment on is their emotional state. Something more has happened. And so, I would say that in the beginning, maybe yoga is a form of exercise, but really what it comes down to in the long run is it's an opportunity for self-discovery.
So yoga is a platform for moving the body, but through doing that, through self-discovery of the emotional self, which right now can be both hard, but also really good, maybe.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I think yoga also has this, in yoga, we really have the opportunity to ultimately, I think, find a state of more equanimity. So even though there is certainly an examination of the self that can be maybe a little bit challenging or uncomfortable, ultimately, I think as time goes by, what's created or what's experienced is more of a leveling and a state of equanimity.
Yeah.
So certainly yoga does penetrate those sort of deeper layers of the self. And we had a teacher in San Francisco who would say, yoga has a way of taking over your life. And I think it's true. You come in the beginning because maybe you want to resolve a back injury or get stronger and more flexible. And maybe that's all it is for you. And that's fine if it is. And if it helps you live a better life, wonderful. But it does have a way of kind of, snowballing in a good way over time.
So yoga can open doors, it sounds like, for a lot of people into their emotional truths, but also, changing injury states, changing mind states, and just kind of learning a lot about how your body moves. And it sounds like, and I've always been kind of curious just for the longer term yoga practice, as you're practicing getting into these positions and building strength and form and, tone, how is that echoed emotionally? Putting yourself into a position, like, who actually wants to be in plank for longer than 5 seconds? Really, But when you can do that, how does that build emotional resilience as well? Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, no. I mean, even if you start at the beginning, go anywhere in the world. Go anywhere in the world and you see kids playing. Let's say they're playing a game. Could be any game. And all of a sudden you see one kid, he's like, yes. You may not hear the yes. He may even say in a language you don't know. But this expression, right? This body connection is all of a sudden saying something wonderful just happened. Similarly, you're walking down the street in a city and you see somebody that's like this.
Yeah.
And you can instantly read their emotions. So there's this really strong body-mind connection.
Yeah.
And so maybe the holding of a pose for a long time may not be that pleasurable, but it may be something that gets you out of a state that you don't want to be in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And I'll add on to that. We were in a philosophy discussion the other day. We hold a weekly Sunday philosophy discussion. And one of our students said something to the effect of, yoga puts you through the stress cycle. So in terms of,
oh wow,
not that it stresses you out, right? But you actually build up your nervous system resilience, because by sort of, if you are doing a more challenging practice, by going through perhaps these more difficult standing poses or back bends, it's like you learn how to face those challenging moments with a state of presence, of neutrality, of equanimity. And in some ways, it's kind of like a playground, right? Where it's like there's no real danger, but you get to sort of rehearse going through these situations that may push your comfort zone.
Yeah, and continuing to focus on your breath and continuing to try and be aware of your body and your alignment in the midst of that. With what better training can we have for the intense stressors that are around us right now? Okay, and you'd mentioned kids and kind of the just innocent and intuitive way in which, you know, we spring into these forms that then are practiced as like part of a sequence in yoga. And I have a 4-year-old and we live in a small space. And so part of the challenge for my husband and I in getting yoga time over the last 9 months has been, do we do yoga at 5:30 in the morning when he is asleep, but get less sleep? Or do we do yoga in the living room with him on our backs? And so I'm curious if you have any advice for people with families, young children, around how they can, you know, incorporate a practice when there are kids in the house in a way that maybe there weren't before.
I think the answer to your question is yes, both of those situations are possible.
Yeah.
I mean, and I'll share a little bit of a story. I mean, if you go to the Iyengar Institute in India, and in the practice hall, there'll be several of the family members. For example, Mr. Iyengar's granddaughter, who has young kids, running around the practice hall. There'll be people from all over the world there practicing, very serious yoga practitioners. And the family will be there practicing. And the granddaughter will be there.
Wow.
The kids are running around the room like mad, stacking up bricks, knocking things over.
Yeah, like my son. Yeah.
It's fun. And so it's like, there can be that too. And then also you'll see there's times when there's a time for the kids not to be there. And there's a quiet time for practice. So both are good. I mean,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And we even see, you know, we take classes as well with senior teachers. And that's one thing about the pandemic and all these online learning opportunities that now actually in some ways we have the opportunity to be more regular students.
Yeah.
And so, you know, oftentimes when we're in class, you know, there may be a class of like 70 people or something online. And then the teacher will suddenly say, you know, she's watching somebody and their kid has walked into the room and she'll be like, oh, do you want to be helpful? See, go over to your mom, sit on her legs, you know, she's in Supta.
Push gently on her sacrum.
So yeah, I think it's both. I think you can have the kids be a part of it, have the family be a part of it, and then maybe sometimes you need to communicate with the family and say, hey, this is, you know, I really need this quiet time, and carve that out.
So really taking a step back and mentally shifting perspective and expectations around, I think sometimes we get into rigid, you know, exercise or movement looks like this. My yoga practice is me going to go to the studio with my people and do yoga, or my yoga practice is going to the gym, you know, or running, whatever it is. And so this is an opportunity to shake that up and to have, you know, really practice equanimity in the midst of the storm. While, you know, the 4-year-old is has a war going on with the Tyrannosaurus Rex and the Pachycephalosaurus, and continue to practice in the midst of it, or really communicate boundaries and have this be an opportunity for, you know, having your kids understand the importance of a quiet and intentional practice of movement and how to respect that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that people are facing that right now, you know, because of the situation in many walks of life, that people are perhaps working at home who weren't working at home before, taking classes at home who weren't taking classes at home online before. And so I think it is pushing us to find new levels of sort of creativity and inventive use of space, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, I've even had, you know, there was a student from Lithuania who was taking an online class with us, and she, you know, she told me, I was recording that particular class, and she told me, you know, I'm just going to do the recording because the time that you're teaching, that's when my whole family's at home and we have a tiny place. So, you know, I think that but she could do the recording later when the family was away, or earlier. I don't know, you know, the exact timing. So I think it does push us certainly to just be more inventive and resourceful and creative with the tools we have and the spaces that we have.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I was talking about this as I was teaching this morning, you know, and you've probably seen this and you go to class and everybody's getting prepared for class, right? Maybe they're doing down dog, they're whatever they're doing, they're getting warmed up. And then the question is what are you getting warmed up for?
Mm.
Are you missing something? Is there an educational aspect to the unprepared state?
Oh, interesting question.
So if you get into your routine and you're doing dog pose, the same dog pose every day. I was joking that I eat oatmeal almost every morning, and I can eat oatmeal without even thinking about it because I'm not enjoying my food.
Yeah.
But do I want to treat my yoga practice that way?
Mm.
And so do I want my dog pose every day to be a new journey? And so maybe today's dog pose is with my 4-year-old on my back, and tomorrow's dog pose is early in the morning before the sun comes up. And how different, and what does it mean to me?
And what is the experience? How does the experience transform if the story about what's happening shifts from I can't do my yoga because I don't have quiet and alone space or a studio of people to I am curious about what this yoga could be like today with what is happening, and how can the experience of going into downward dog or coming into upward facing, how can that be fresh and new and present with the circumstances surrounding me, instead of it becoming kind of just like a hamster wheel, hamster going on its wheel, and it's the same, just being repeated without much presence or curiosity.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And it's interesting with yoga in that way that, you may do the same. There may be certain asanas that you do every day or every time you practice, but it really can never be the same thing twice. It's like eating a piece of fruit. You may eat an apple every day, but you're not eating the same apple.
Yeah. And depending on your state of mind, you really aren't eating the same apple, or depending on your state of mind, it's just that oatmeal that you're eating every morning. And there isn't that kind of experience of it as something that's new every day.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I'm hearing, like just kind of reflecting our conversation so far, yoga is about more than exercise. That can sometimes be the starting point for folks coming in to get movement practice or to help correct an injury. But it really opens doors into the emotional body, or into kind of discovering emotional states and developing emotional resilience and physical resilience around how you can have equanimity in the midst of stress. And you're practicing that in the poses as you go through them. And it's a great time right now to get creative and inventive and to radically shift mindset around it. It has to be this way, and if it's not this way, you can't do it, to what's possible, and how can what's possible even become, better than before, or an interesting experience. When you were talking about the Iyengar family in India and all of these very serious practitioners from around the world, I have to just imagine that's something of a shock for the people coming from around the world, potentially, to have children running around. And so to kind of really adopt that mindset and be open to what's possible. Doesn't take a lot of space, doesn't take a lot of materials. You don't have to have a lot of props. You can just have blank floor space, some blank wall, maybe a sticky mat.
I think that's about well summed up. Yeah.
Okay. and I'm curious, we've got a few more minutes. In terms of motivation to start, we're so social, and I think a lot of my health coaching clients talk about missing their yoga studios, missing their community. Some of them have bridged into virtual classes. A lot of them haven't. It doesn't feel the same, they say. So I'm curious, kind of, this is a dual question. On the one hand, how do you get motivation to start a new approach? Either starting yoga just to start it, or starting yoga in a new way. And how can people join in virtually?
Yeah. We have lots of students that either before or after class, they're able to say, oh, hi, John, or hi, Janice, or, they see their friends. Their friends are still coming. We've been fortunate to keep our community together. And so it's an opportunity, and I think that a buddy system is a good idea. You don't get to see your friend that lives in town, and all you got to do is say, hey, join me for the 9 o'clock yoga class.
Yeah.
And you can see that person.
Yeah, and I like something that one of our teachers said. She was like, don't call it social distancing, call it physical distancing.
That's brilliant.
Though we are physically distanced, right now we are having a social experience.
Yeah. It's true.
You know, and no, it isn't exactly the same. I mean, I think that we are all looking forward to the day when it feels safe to be together in the studio again. But you know, it's a pretty good second. You know, it is a way to stay connected to your teachers, to your friends, fellow practitioners, and to stay connected to yourself and to your practice, most importantly. You know, and it's a wonderful opportunity to connect with people perhaps across the country or across the globe. You know, we have had people join us from certainly far outside the Asheville region, and you know, we've taken classes from people right now. We're actually hosting a senior teacher who's joining us from North India to teach. So you know, there is also this wonderful opportunity for kind of more of a global connection too. So yeah, there's definitely pros and cons for sure.
I love that you speak to pros and cons while you also can consistently throughout this conversation speak to where's the opportunity within what's happening right now. Where's the opportunity for a deeper level of, you know, presence in yoga that's you know, encouraged by the children running around, or by having to shift your schedule a bit to find quiet before the dawn, you know. And then in this, where's the opportunity in a virtual community and kind of having the chance to connect to people you would never otherwise see at the yoga studio in, you know, North Asheville. And ultimately coming back to that beautiful, beautiful quote that it doesn't have to be about social distancing. Physical distancing does not mean we can't be socially connected, and maybe even connected in a bigger way. Although it's different, it still can count as social connection.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, you know, it really can still become a touchstone. It's like we kind of have our regular classes we teach and attend, and there's something about that that I think does really create a sense of cohesive learning and community that is very real. That is not just virtual. It is a real connection.
And maybe we'll be a springboard, you know, after the pandemic to a different kind of interrelatedness, you know, on the teacher level, on the student level, just in that community. Seeds are maybe being planted that otherwise we wouldn't have thought about reaching across, you know, the same breadths of space and virtual reality to, I mean, you know, students in Lithuania, would they have found you before? I don't know. I really think it was brilliant. This was just casually mentioned, and I want us to go back to it because I know that one barrier for me personally in attending virtual yoga classes is schedule and routine, and not having, you know, daycare, not having, you know, anything like that. And so not being able to show up for the 4 o'clock yoga class, and the idea of asking permission to record a class so that you can play it later, or finding creative ways again, how, if it were possible to be able to access this class, what would that look like? And then being kind of creative and asking the teachers what they're comfortable with.
Right. Most of our class series we record.
Yeah,
and we make those recordings available.
Mm-hmm.
So our general classes, like I teach a general class, like this morning I taught a general class. I typically don't record that.
Although we have had sometimes on special requests. If we have a regular student who's like, I can't come today, the grandkids are visiting, can you record? We'll do it. So
yeah. Okay, great. Yeah. So class series are recorded. Well, the last question I really have is for folks who are beginning with yoga right now. How, you know, the new faces you've seen join your classes, how has that been for them, do you think? Because you know, learning alignment without having the teacher there in person to say, actually, you need your shoulders above your wrists for this, or you could, you know, injure yourself. How has that been?
I'll say this. I've said this from when we started this whole teaching on Zoom. I think teaching on Zoom is forcing us to be better teachers.
Oh, interesting.
And I think that we're going to come out of this much stronger because you've had to learn to be really explicit. You know,
with your words.
Yeah. I mean, normally in a typical Iyengar yoga class, if you really wanted to convey a detail, you would say, okay, everybody come watch. And you would bring them all to you, and you would really exemplify that detail. You would really show, now go back to your spot and do it yourself. But now you've got to convey that across the computer screen. And so you have to exaggerate actions. You have to use
very clear with your words.
Very clear. Yeah. So
that's fascinating.
Yeah.
So, what you found?
The students are visible too. You know, as long as they have their cameras set up, that, you know, you're not hidden. I mean, you interact, and you know, yeah, people are not invisible. So, unless they're like practicing in the dark or something.
So you are able to do corrections kind of, through the computer screen and just say, hey, Ariana, just so that, bring your hips up and back as you're in that position so that you can avoid injury. And then also, it sounds like I hadn't thought about how teaching through Zoom would really push you to become verbally precise and clear. And also, as you're demonstrating, that you would have to be kind of overly demonstrating to project it clearly through the screen.
Yeah.
But that makes a lot of sense as well.
Yeah. I think we've done well. I think Iyengar Yoga as a community has somewhat done well on this Zoom platform. And I think one of the reasons is we're really going about this of teaching someone how to do it. Mm-hmm. This idea of just putting someone through their paces. Mm-hmm. Really, like even I was talking about the different dog pose now is different than dog pose tomorrow. How do you experience it differently? Today, maybe we're doing dog pose with the shoulders. Tomorrow, I'm teaching it from the legs, the ankles. And so it's kind of like every day is a new journey. And I think Iyengar Yoga has done well on Zoom because we really are on this journey of exploring how, why, what does this mean? And so I think that translates, if that makes any sense at all.
It does. Let me repeat it back. I hear you saying that Iyengar Yoga sees the poses or the asanas as not static. Like how do you do them, and how do you bring your attention to the nuances of different body parts while you go through the poses? So one class series, you're focusing, or one day you're focusing on where are your wrists at in this pose. Another one you're focusing on where are the hips at, where are the legs at. So it really is, how do you do this pose, and how do you do it well, or in a way that is appropriate for the body? And so that translates neatly through Zoom, because you're already coming from a paradigm of how do we do the poses? Let's talk about that and teach it and learn it and then rediscover it consistently. And so good time to start with Iyengar Yoga, it sounds like.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything else that you'd like to add about, yoga right now, your studio, Iyengar Yoga? Just any last thoughts?
I know that there was a question that you had proposed, was like kind of how do you get started, or are there things that you can do at home?
Yeah. Thank you so much for bringing that up.
No worries. And I would say one thing I would just suggest to people, if you are newer to yoga, I would say just take a class, and whether it's once a week or once a month, and then just practice whatever's taught in that class. If you pull out one thing, one pose you learned, one instruction, and then that's something maybe you could do every day for 5 minutes, between classes. So I think that's always a great place
to start.
That's
a great idea.
And I think, it goes back to, if we're teaching you how, I would trust if you come to my class, I might even say, now here's how you do it. Now you need your practice on your own. You're not coming to the class to get a workout, even though that might happen. You might break a sweat, you might work hard, but really it's like, here's how you do it. And then we're counting on you between now and next week when you come back that you've practiced and you explored that.
Ideally. Well, and that's where you have the kind of live, you have a space for open practices where people can practice, so there can still be some accountability and support. But I think that, the way you describe yoga is a departure from the pop culture concept of yoga right now, where it's still very much in fashion, and power yoga or hot yoga, where it's about really pushing through the asanas for a purpose of sweating or getting in shape. And this is a different approach. How do we learn the poses, and how do we learn them again and again and again? How do we use yoga and the physical forms of it as a way to, learn about ourselves emotionally and physically, and find equanimity during stress?
Yeah, absolutely. Very well summarized. You're a great listener.
Thanks. What I do.
Good interviewer as well.
Oh, thank you, Greta. Well, no, I think that's beautiful, and I'm so grateful to the both of you for taking the time to have this conversation. I think
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Anytime. Yeah. Thank you for all the work that you're doing as well.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, wherever there can be more intentionality and stress management and healthy movement, we want to help have more of that in our community and in our personal lives. And so this is definitely a topic that's very dear to the heart of integrative family medicine and to myself. And again, one last big thank you to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our pleasure.
All right.